Hello, my name is Victoria Thompson and I am an Assistant Child Development Practitioner with the Child and Adolescent Autism Service. Today we're going to be covering the topic of discussing the diagnosis of autism. Some of the areas we'll cover today include discussing the diagnosis of autism with the child or young person, siblings, school, with family and friends, as well as why we may want to have this conversation with our children and young people, when is the right time, and what exactly do we say when we're having these conversations. Let's begin by looking at discussing the diagnosis with the child. After a child or young person receives a diagnosis of autism, you may be wondering, should I tell them? You may have many worries, such as how much of the diagnosis will they understand? Will a diagnosis create a label for them and limit their options? Will it cause them upset or anger, or will they use it as an excuse for their behaviour? On the other hand, there can be benefits to telling a child or young person about their diagnosis. For example, they may develop a better understanding of who they are, and it may provide them with the answers as to why they think and behave the way they do. This can help them gain a better insight into how exactly their brain works and allow them to form a sense of identity. It can also be important in helping a child or young person develop their own voice and independence in order to advocate in their best interests and needs. So as you can see, there's really a range of reasons why you may or may not want to have this discussion with a child or young person. But it's important to remember there's no right or wrong answer. It's about doing what you feel is best for your child, young person and family. There are some key points you should think about when considering discussing the diagnosis with your child or young person. Firstly, it's really important to think about their age and ability. Here we want to think about your child's level of understanding and where they're at developmentally. So when we talk about developmental versus chronological age, what we're meaning is your child's chronological age is their actual physical age, so the number of years, months and days since they've been born. Whereas when we refer to their developmental age, that's slightly more complex. It refers to their level of maturity of their brain and body. We measure a child's developmental stage by their skills such as how well they communicate and understand. Some 10-year-olds will understand you telling them about their diagnosis quite easily and relate well, while other 10-year-olds will need simpler language, more pictures and examples, or a book aimed at children or a child of a younger age. A really pivotal point in development is language. So it's really important you think of your child's language ability and the language that you may want to use when discussing the diagnosis. It's really also important to consider their level of awareness. Do they ask questions about why they're different? Were they aware of the assessment process? Another key area you may want to consider is how your child might respond. Well, your child or young person may have a range of thoughts and feelings about their diagnosis. They may be relieved and happy as the diagnosis helps them have a better understanding of who they are and their identity. They may be concerned and worried about what this means for their health and their future. They may wonder, are they unwell or sick? On the opposite end, they may not believe they have autism and deny their diagnosis completely. Equally, they may not feel anything and show no concern either way about their diagnosis. It's not uncommon for a child or young person to jump between feelings. One day they may be relieved and the next angry. The most important thing to remember here is all these feelings and emotions are normal. It's important to respect how they react and allow them to process the information in whatever way feels most comfortable to them. Luke Jackson found out he had autism as a teenager. He went on to write the book Freaks, Geeks and Asperger's Syndrome, A User's Guide to Adolescence. Within the book, Luke describes the moment he found out he had autism. He said, I had finally found the reason why people classed me as weird. It was not just because I was clumsy or stupid. My heart lightened instantly and the constant nagging that accompanied me all my life stopped immediately. I finally knew why I felt different, why I felt like I was a freak, why I didn't seem to fit in. Even better, it was not my fault. Luke found his diagnosis really useful as it gave him a better understanding of who he actually is, and that can be the case for some of our children. No matter what, approach the conversation with positivity. When you interact with your child in a happy, positive way, they'll be more likely to respond in the same way. So adopting a positive approach from the beginning means they will be more likely to approach the conversation with a positive outlook. Highlight all the positive strengths that your child or young person has because of their autism. For example, you're always on time for school and appointments. Or if they have a specialist interest, tell them how knowledgeable they are. More than anything, remind and emphasise to them that nothing has changed. They're still your child and you love them very much. We know it can feel overwhelming when considering all the factors involved in discussing a diagnosis of autism. That's why it's important to tailor it to your child and family. Autism is a spectrum. Some people still think of it like this picture in a line with less and more functional levels, when in actual fact, autism is much more like this, the autism wheel. You'll probably already be fairly familiar with this. So you want to talk to them about their autism, what that looks and feels like to your child and family. Remember, you are the expert of your child or young person. Your child or young person is the expert of their autism. And while you know them best, it's important to personalise the conversation to your child by discussing the areas of autism which they experience every day in their lives. This makes the conversation much more meaningful to your child, and they'll be more able to relate and understand their diagnosis more clearly. Here is an example of a person's autism using the autism wheel. Each person with autism will have a set of traits all in different areas of the spectrum. So as you can see here, this person has a range of different abilities throughout the traits. This child or young person may have limited language, speaking in short sentences, and understand short 2 to 3 word instructions. And you can also see that they may struggle with their executive function, which means they may be disorganised and find it really hard to start their homework. And again, this is another profile of autism, which looks completely different to the last one. This child or young person has good language abilities, but may struggle with their motor skills, which means they may look clumsy, fall, and have difficulties with their handwriting. They may also have some level of difficulty with their sensory processing, so they may find noise, light, or textures difficult. What's really important to take from this is that we're all unique and we all play a very important role in a neurodiverse world. Another way to discuss the diagnosis can be through the use of metaphors. It can be a really easy and helpful way for your child to relate to the traits of their autism as you discuss the diagnosis. We've included some really handy links if you want to go to the pages to get some more information. But for example, if you want to talk about emotional dysregulation, you may talk about a child whose feelings feel way too big for their body. Or you may want to talk about the executive function difficulties. So you may want to talk about a huge pile of papers with no folders to organise them in. During the conversation with your child or young person, remind them that no two people are the same. Explore with them what it means to be different by discussing people's uniqueness, strengths, weaknesses, and the things they may like or dislike. Help them to understand that everyone is different and difference is good. It's also important to highlight that while no two people are the same, no two autistic people are the same. And that's why you may want to consider discussing neurodiversity with your child or young person. You've probably already heard the term neurodiversity, and that's because it's an important one. You'll likely want to discuss this with your child, young person, or anyone that you're considering discussing the diagnosis with. There's lots of different ways to discuss neurodiversity, and it's really dependent on your child's age and ability. But it should be viewed just like the autism wheel. It's not a line. Neurodiversity refers to the fact that we have lots of different people with lots of different brains. This means there's going to be differences in how people process and learn information. Just like no two fingerprints are the same, no two brains are wired to think or behave the same. Which is why it's important to remember when you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. So neurodiversity is really about understanding that these differences are a normal part of the world we live in. If you look at Pat, this is Pat's brain. These are Pat's friends. They all have brains too, but no two brains are exactly alike. And that is exactly what we mean by neurodiversity. We live in a neurodiverse world. You are part of a neurodiverse family. Some children or young people may need to use visuals to communicate their needs, while others have no issues in speaking. Some children or young people may find loud noises incredibly overwhelming, while others won't. That's because their brains are wired differently. One is not more or less, they're just different. Talk with them about what it means to be a part of a neurodiverse world. And by that, we are simply referring to the fact that we are all different from each other, and being autistic or neurodivergent is a normal part of us all being unique. We all play a part in living in a neurodiverse world, and it's important to remind our children and young people that while we're all different, difference can be good. We often hear that great minds think alike. In this case, great minds think differently. Some of our children and young people have found it really helpful and reassuring to find a role model who is also autistic. It helps them to feel connected and not alone. Here are some of our examples. Firstly, we have Anne Hegarty from the very popular TV show The Chase, followed by Albert Einstein, who was a really famous theoretical physicist. Next, we have Tim Burton, who is a film director, writer and artist. You may know some of his movies, such as Edward Scissorhands, Corpse Bride and Beetlejuice. Last week, we have Stephen Wiltshire, MBE, who is an architectural artist, and he can draw incredibly intricate landscapes from memory. There's so many more, so it may be nice for you to explore these role models further with your child when discussing the diagnosis. One of the key aspects of having this conversation is reassuring your child. Help them to feel confident in who they are by reminding them that they're loved exactly the way they are, and that you're always there if they want to talk or if they have any questions. Encourage them, let them know that there's a lot of support for those times which they may find more challenging, and that you'll work together to overcome those challenges. Many young people enjoy connecting with like-minded individuals, whether that's in a hobby, specialist interest, or through their autism. There's some really great local groups and charities that can help with this, such as Autism and I and the National Autistic Society, which both have bases here in Belfast. Using additional resources such as books and video links can be a really lovely way to start the conversation and provide a more visual, concrete form of information. You can find a wealth of resources and activity sheets which cover all ages and abilities. All My Stripes by Danielle Royer is a particularly beautiful book for a younger child, and many of these books can be found online as videos. While the Asper Kids Secret Book of Social Rules by Jennifer Cook O'Till is a particularly funny but practical book for helping teens with understanding social codes like making friends, common conversation pitfalls, to blending in versus standing out. Here are some online videos that you may find helpful. Some of these you may be familiar with, such as Pablo, which is a very popular kids series focusing on a boy with autism, while Amazing Things Happen is a short film to raise awareness and understanding around autism. Next, we're going to talk about discussing the diagnosis with brothers and sisters. It's just as important to have a good conversation with brothers and sisters about the diagnosis of autism as it is with your child who is autistic. Having an autistic brother or sister is just the same as every other brother-sister relationship. It can be fun and exciting, and it can be confusing and really frustrating. Talking about the diagnosis with a sibling will again be very dependent on their chronological and physical age and their developmental level. So again, considering their physical age versus their developmental age and level of understanding around what it means to have autism. Whether they're an older or younger sibling may be a factor, and their relationship to their sibling. It's also important to consider, particularly if your child is older, whether they want their sibling to know, and if they actively want to be involved in that conversation. Discussing the diagnosis with different age siblings can be quite tricky, so it's important that we consider age-appropriate language. So for a younger child, you may say, Billy finds it hard to play. His brain works differently from yours and mine. He doesn't like to pretend with toys like we do. As they get older, they'll be able to understand more abstract explanations and a bit more of the background to the difficulties. So you may then try something like, Billy finds it hard to understand how other people feel. This is because he has autism, and this means that his brain works differently to ours. Then you can go on to explain more specific behaviours that their sibling displays and how these fit in with autism. So with autism, people can have difficulties with social and communication skills, and this means it's hard for Billy to play and understand how others feel. It's not uncommon for siblings to have lots of questions. Encourage this. The more they talk about it, the more they will be able to understand, and this will have a really positive impact on their relationship with their siblings. Some of the most common questions a sibling may ask are, why do they have autism? How did they get it? Do I have it too? Can I catch it off them? Will they get better? What will happen when they get older? What do I tell my friends? The best approach is to be open and honest in your responses. If they're particularly worried about what to tell their friends, help prepare them for these conversations by coming up with really simple, easy ways to explain autism to their peers. Depending on their age, you may want to role-play conversations with them to ease their worries. Sometimes it can be difficult to manage family activities that everyone can enjoy. This is particularly true if there's an activity that your child or other children really want to do, but your child with autism struggles with it. You can also find this happens with birthday parties and big events. It can be really helpful in these instances to, if possible, set aside some time each week for you and your other children to spend time doing activities they enjoy. This special time can be really beneficial as children with autism often have very busy schedules between therapy sessions, appointments, home visits, and you can feel split in trying to share your attention. So dedicating a period of time each week for your other child or children can really help with this. It's not fair. How come he or she gets to eat chicken dippers again tonight and I don't? I have to eat all those veggies. I'm sure you've heard something similar in your own home. A helpful way to address it's not fair is to discuss what is meant by equal and fair. Just because it's equal doesn't mean it's always fair, and we want to ensure we include everyone in our family. This particular visual can be really beneficial in explaining these concepts during these conversations. Continue to reassure your child or children. Remind them of how important they are to you, that nothing's changed and that you love all your children equally. It's particularly important to allow them to process what they're feeling. Reassure that their feelings are normal and valid. Sibling relationships can be incredibly powerful. They can be their greatest teacher and biggest fan. Here we've included some sibling resources for all ages. There's a range of books, for example, No Two Stars Are the Same by the Stellas, which encourages awareness by explaining what autism is. It's aimed at 7 to 11-year-olds. There's some videos of books which can be found online, and SIBS is a charity for brother and sisters of disabled children and adults with a range of online resources and webinars. Next, we're going to talk around the importance of discussing the diagnosis in school. Sharing the diagnosis and report with the school can be really helpful in ensuring everyone is working as part of a team to ensure your child or young person's needs are being met within the school environment. It also allows you to talk through any concerns you may have and raise awareness of any challenges your child may experience on a day-to-day basis. For example, anxieties around being in the classroom or morning routines which may impact upon getting to school on time. It's important everyone is working together and that everyone is aware of how they can help your child or young person so they can have an enjoyable experience in school. In sharing the diagnosis with the school, you can also help to increase awareness of autism. This is really important within the classroom. By increasing autism awareness, you're promoting kindness, empathy and inclusion not only for your child but for everyone who has autism. This can be done using books, video links, information assemblies, or taking on a challenge to raise money for a charity. Depending on your child's age, they may want to have some input into how much of this diagnosis is shared with the school. For example, they may not want classmates to know they have autism. On the other hand, they may want to play a really active, face-forward role in raising awareness for autism. Discussing the diagnosis with family and friends. Sharing the diagnosis with family and friends can be an important part of the autism journey for many families. By sharing the diagnosis, you can begin to help those around you understand your family and possibly some of the challenges that you face. It's important that you discuss what autism is like for your child and family specifically. Most people have their own ideas around what they think autism is. Therefore, it's not uncommon for people to ask, are they like Sheldon or Rain Man? It's really important that we work to dispel these myths and misconceptions. Educate your friends and family firstly on what autism is. Think back to the autism wheel at the beginning. It may be helpful to show them the autism wheel. This demonstrates that autism isn't a straight line with people less or more autistic, but rather in a wheel with differing levels of ability within each section. Emphasise that autism is a spectrum, which means that different people can have very different experiences of autism. And it's just as important to educate them on the fact that not all children or young people will experience the same challenges. For this reason, explain to them the importance of not comparing people who have autism. Talk about your child or young person's strengths too. For example, talk about if they're particularly good at remembering directions. Focus on their strengths and really emphasise how wonderful they are. It's not uncommon to hear any of these statements. People with autism don't want friends. People with autism don't have any emotions. People with autism have learning difficulties. They will grow out of it, or it's just a phrase. Each of these statements are untrue, can be hurtful, but most of all just aren't helpful. If you come across any of these while you're discussing the diagnosis with your friends or family, for example, people with autism don't have emotions, take it as an opportunity to educate your friend or family member. Let them know that this statement is untrue and unhelpful for many people with autism, as well as your child or young person. Let them know that people with autism do have emotions, but sometimes a person with autism can find it really hard to label those emotions, so they find it hard to let us know when they feel angry, sad, or worried. You may also find that people may ask why their behaviour changes when they're in different environments. For example, they seem fine in school. You may want to use the Coke bottle analogy when explaining this. Throughout the day, your child or young person will have many different experiences. Each one is like shaking a Coke bottle. A different teacher than expected, noise in the classroom, smells in the canteen. If they're an older child, they could be running late for their next class. Each of these is like a shake of the bottle. By the time they get home, they're ready to explode, and that's usually what happens. This is called a delayed effect. It can happen anywhere, and it's just one of the reasons your child may act differently across environments. They may find one aisle of a grocery shop more difficult than the other due to sensory differences in lighting or sound. They may be okay at a house they've never been to because someone they feel very comfortable with is there, or they may really struggle at a birthday party because they don't know who will be there. Equally, they could be just as upset at the park because the usual footpath is closed. There's really no right or wrong because each child or young person's experience of autism can vary greatly. It's important to remind your friends and family of this when discussing the diagnosis and reiterating the different reasons why behaviour can change across different places, right down to levels of tiredness, hunger, and times of day. Or remind them that when they've met one child or young person with autism, they have met one child or young person with autism. Again, we've just included some resources on some great charities and organisations that you can get further information from and that may be able to help you facilitate further conversations around autism. That brings us to the end of our webinar on discussing the diagnosis. Thanks for taking the time to listen, and we really hope it will be of benefit to you and your family.